I finally got to use the new Canon 35mm 1.4 VCM lens on a real world shoot. I shot a wedding this past weekend, but unfortunately due to the contract I signed, I'm not able to show you any of the pictures that I shot from this wedding as I was the second shooter. So I also did some of my own tests, and I'm also going to put it up against this little guy, the 35mm 1.8, to see if there is a glaring $1,000 difference between the 1.4 L lens and this lens. So let's jump right into the video. So I did my unboxing video for this lens a couple days ago. One of the first things that really stood out to me as soon as I took it out the box was the build quality of this lens. It just feels really durable, from the lens itself to the lens cap to the lens hood. Like, even though the lens cap and lens hood are plastic, they're like a really hard plastic. So I feel comfortable taking this pretty much anywhere, and if I bang it on something by accident or anything like that, I don't fear that it's going to crack and crumble like any of the other Canon contemporary lenses. I did do a side-by-side comparison to the 85mm f2 lens contemporary from Canon, because they both do have 67mm thread sizes, so I wanted to see if they were the same size lens. As you can see, the L series lens is just a little bit bigger than the 85mm f2, but that's just another benefit of this lens, is that it's very compact. And when they said it's a hybrid lens, they really meant it. It's really a hybrid lens, and we'll get more into that later. But I do like the size, the small form factor of this lens, so it's not going to be too heavy in your bag. You can be able to carry it and not feel the weight of 1,000 pounds on your shoulders. And also, just for kicks, here's a side-by-side of what it looks like in size next to the 35mm contemporary 1.8 lens. Now, as we get into this video and we get into some of the side-by-side tests, full disclaimer, like I said earlier, I'm not expecting the L series lens to just beat the 1.8 by a hair. I'm not saying the 1.8 is comparable or per se to the L series lens. Obviously the L series lens is better glass, is a faster prime, going down to 1.4 instead of 1.8, better autofocus, better motor. So yeah, it's all around better lens. But what I really want to see is, like, can you really tell the difference, especially when you start shooting at like the 2.5, 2.8 and f4 types of ranges. So first things first, let's talk about the photo side of things. I took this out and I shot it at wide open, at 1.4, at 1.8, at 2.8, and at f4. And here I'm just going to show you kind of a montage of the pictures that I took. So one of the things that I noticed is, obviously when it's wide open at 1.4 versus the 1.8 for the Canon contemporary lens and the 35mm, obviously the 35mm lens, obviously a 1.4 lens is going to be a lot sharper. Like I said, it has better glass, it has a faster prime, so the background is going to be a little bit more blurred, a little bit more bokeh in the background. But at 1.8, you're still getting a great background blur. When you stop it down to 1.8 and have it even with the 35mm macro contemporary lens, you still see that the sharpness on the L series lens is still there. But what happens when you stop down to 2.8 into f4 on both of these lenses? Can you tell a glaring significant difference between these two lenses? So when they're both shot at 2.8, it's kind of harder to see which one is the L series lens. Now you can tell because, like I said, better glass, better optics on the L series lens, so it's going to be a little bit sharper. But when it comes down to it, when you're shooting at that 2.8 or even at that f4 mark, is it going to be such a glaring difference that you say to yourself, oh, I definitely need the 1.4 VCM lens? Because at the end of the day, a lot of times, if you are mature in photography, well, mature is a bad word, that sounds very condescending, let me take that back. But a lot of photographers, they'll buy these 1.2s, 1.4s lenses, but a lot of times they're not shooting at 1.2 and 1.4. Like me being a wedding and portrait photographer and headshot photographer, my headshots I shoot at f8. And my portraits, a lot of times I shoot at 2.5 or so, 2.8, just because I want to get the whole face in focus. If you shoot at that 1.2, 1.4 mark, you'll definitely get the eye tack sharp, but once it starts to fall back to like the ears and the back of the head and then the hair, if they have long hair, all that stuff is going to be out of focus. And especially headshots, I want to get the whole head in focus, so I'm shooting at f8. So when you're getting these clear pictures at f4 on both of these lenses, is it such a big deal to get a 1.4 lens if you're going to be shooting at that 2.8, 4 mark anyway? And like I said, I shot a wedding this past weekend, so I was responsible for the groomsmen, and then when we got into the ceremony, I switched to a different lens. But the whole beginning part of the wedding, I was shooting on a 35. And if you're shooting groomsmen, I would hope you're not shooting wide open at a 1.2 or 1.4, because that depth of field is going to be really, really shallow, unless you can perfectly line everybody up on the same plane on the same level plane. So, oh gosh, anytime I'm shooting a group, no matter how many people there are, whether it be 2 people, whether it be 4 people, whether it be 20 people, I'm always stopping down to at least like 3.2 to f4. That's really the sweet spot when it comes to layers and comes to groups. I know one shot in particular, when it comes to the groomsmen, I had them do a flying V. So I had the groom at the front, and then I had the rest of the groomsmen make a V. So when you're doing that, you're probably going to have to stop down to like 5.6 or 6 point something to get everybody in focus. If you're shooting that at 1.2 or 1.4, the groom's going to be in focus and everybody else in the picture is going to be blurry, and you don't want to deliver that type of picture to the client. So when you're stopping down to this mark, is it going to be that $1,000 difference, or that $1,000 like, hey, I definitely need this L series lens? Something to think about. Now, like I said, the L series is still better optically, better glass, better motor, better autofocus, things like that. But if you are on a budget, or if you're just starting in photography, do you need to get this 35mm 1.4 lens, or could you get by with, very good results with a 35mm 1.8? That's up to you. But anyway, let's move on to the video side of things. So right now, actually, I'm recording on the 35mm 1.4 VCM lens, and I'm shooting wide open at 1.4 for video. Now, I just said, a lot of times I'm not shooting wide open because the back is like, my ears and stuff are going to be out of focus and my eyes are going to be sharp, but I wanted to shoot at 1.4 for today, so you can see like how it looks wide open, how it looks optically. Don't have any filters or NDs or mist filters on, so this is just a raw image you're getting. I am shooting in C-Log like I did in my last video, so if you're interested in some custom LUTs that I made, let me know down in the comments. This is my Sable LUT, so yeah, using in the studio. But anyway, as you can see here, moving into video, I did some tests out there in the field, and I shot it again wide open at 1.4. Then I stopped down to 1.8, 2.8, and f4 for video. So for video, if I'm being completely honest, I can't see a huge difference between the L series lens and the contemporary 35mm 1.8. Like, I shot an engagement session on this 35mm 1.8, and the quality I got out of that was astounding. Like, I really do like this 1.8 lens for video. For photos, it can be a little bit tricky. Like I said, if you're stopping down to like f4, f5.6 or something like that, you're still getting some really good quality. But when you're talking about being able to shoot wide open and then having that better optic glass, that's going to always be kind of a downfall of the contemporary style lenses. But if you are mainly a videographer, or you do mainly video, or you want to do talking head videos like this, I think the 35mm 1.8 is great. Now, is this L lens better? Yes, but I think if you don't want to spend $1,500 and you want to spend just $500 on a 35mm 1.8, you're not missing out on too much. So I really do like the image quality of the 35mm 1.8, but like I said, I can't see a huge difference between the two in video. But yeah, if you can't afford it, might as well buy it. But I don't think it's really that far off from the 35mm 1.8. So I think Canon did a really good job with their contemporary prime lenses, with the quality and the glass quality and everything like that. So who do I think this lens is for? Now, Canon announced this, or projected this, or displays this as a hybrid lens for photographers and videographers, and I think that it works very well for both photo and video. I think this lens is going to be more so for like the wedding photographers or the hybrid shooters. And if you do wedding photography and videography, or if you just want to swing it, and if you only do talking head videos or content creation, you just want to buy this lens just because, then hey, by all means, you know, get this lens. Like I said, it's a 67mm thread size, and it's not too much bigger than the 85mm f2 by Canon. So it's a really small form factor, really compact, and it's not too heavy to carry around with you all day. And it's definitely an everyday lens. When I first heard this lens announced, I was kind of disappointed initially because I said, well, this lens doesn't have image stabilization and it's not a macro lens. So like, what are we talking about? But it does have the iris ring. You know, that's great for video. If you don't want to touch the camera, you can just switch, you know, flip the iris ring thing. But you know, even with the lens having image stabilization or the contemporary lens having image stabilization and being having macro capabilities, when you really think about it in the hybrid, you know, world, especially if you're doing video, a lot of times if you're doing video, you're shooting on a gimbal anyway. So the image stabilization isn't really the end of the world. Now, macro capabilities, a lot of times if I'm shooting macro shots, I'm using my 85mm anyway, because I like to get that compression for macro. Like if I'm shooting rings or if I'm shooting details, I like to shoot with an 85mm. A 35mm, if I'm shooting like a wide space of details or something like that, and I need to get that in the frame or whatever. But the 85mm is probably my go-to for macro shots. So when I first heard of the 35mm VCM lens, I was like, you know what, I'm kind of disappointed. I don't know. But now that I got to use it and put it up against, you know, this contemporary lens, I'm like, you know what? Like I still, you know, the VCM L lens is still better, but this lens is like really, really good. So if you are a beginner photographer and you're like, well, $1,500 sounds kind of steep, I don't know if I can swing that, this lens is still really good. And as you can see by the comparisons that I did, there is a difference in quality, but it's not to the point where a client's going to be like, well, this is just not good quality. Clients don't really care what you're shooting with anyway, just as long as you're getting the shots that they want. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't recommend shooting a wedding with like a kit lens, but a client is not going to come up to you and be like, hey, are you using full frame? Are you using APS-C? Are you using a prime, a zoom? Are you using a fast zoom, fast prime? Are you using L? Are you using contemporary? Now, if you're shooting with if you're shooting a wedding for another photographer, maybe they might ask you, I don't know. But if you're shooting for a regular client, they're not going to care what you shoot with, just as long as you get the shots and as long as it looks good. And with this contemporary lens, it's still going to look good. So with all that being said, I highly recommend the 35mm 1.4 if you can swing it. But if you can't, the 35mm 1.8, I think gets the job done and you're going to be really happy with it. Okay, so that is my very short term, very compact review of this lens. Once I shoot with it a lot more, do some more weddings with it, do some more video work with it, and just do some more talking head with it, I'll be able to really give like a deep dive analysis. But if this video was of some value to you and, you know, gave you some insight on the lens, then like and subscribe to the channel. And if you are subscribed to the channel and you're watching this, leave a comment down in the description because I don't hear from y'all enough. If you aren't subscribed to the channel, like and subscribe to the channel, and then leave a comment down in the description saying you're new here. So I appreciate each and every single one of you, and until next time, peace.